Welcome to the CCL CCL webinar, Using Wearables and Self-Tracking Technology for Leader Development, which will be presented today by Kathleen and Marion Ruderman of the Center for Creative Leadership. My name is Tracy Dobbins, and I'll be serving as your CCL moderator. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top-ranked provider of executive education globally. We work with 2/3 of the world's top 500 companies, small business and government, providing innovative solutions for the entire organization and programs proven to transform the individual. Our work is based on significant research from our own elite teams to the finest global sources, and we share it readily with you today in this discussion. Today's webinar is our 8th topic on the Thought Leadership Series, Future Fluency. We'll continue to offer more content on this topic and many others that are relevant to preparing yourself and your organization to lead in the future. In addition to asking that you participate in the chat conversation during the next hour, just want to mention that you might want to check out our Twitter feed right now at twitter.com/CCLDOTORG. We're conducting some live polls on the topic today, and if you participate in one of the polls, or tweet, you can follow us. You'll be automatically entered for a free CCL gift. Now I'd like to welcome our presenters. Kathleen is a Manager of Strategic Research at the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. Her research interests include integrating neuroscience and holistic practices into leadership development, exploring equity, diversity, and inclusion, and understanding creativity and innovation. Her research has been published broadly in both academic and popular press venues, and she has won multiple awards and honors for her work. In addition to conducting research, Kathleen also creates research-based leadership tools and offers leadership presentations and workshops. Kathleen holds a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MS and PhD degrees in psychology from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Joining Kathleen is Marion Ruderman. Marion has broad experience with over 30 years in the field of leadership development. At CCL, she has held a variety of research and management positions. Marion is currently a Senior Fellow and Senior Research Scientist. She has written several books, assessments, and products, including Standing at the Crossroads, Next Steps for High-Achieving Women, and the Work-Life Indicator. She holds a BA from Cornell University and an MA and PhD in Organizational Psychology from the University of Michigan. Marion is a Fellow with the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology and the American Psychological Association. Welcome, Kathleen and Marion. I'll now turn the session over to Marion.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome everybody. We're very excited to be here, and we're looking forward to sharing this next hour with you. We're going to talk about what do self-tracking technologies have to do with leadership development, and basically this is a story of our journey. As you heard from our introductions, both Kathleen and I are psychologists who are interested in learning and development. And we're particularly interested in the idea that personal development is very important for leadership development, that personal development is the gateway to developing the various competencies you need to do your job and to be able to deal with change. And so as we were working on this, we also couldn't help but notice the explosion in the use of self-tracking devices. Probably many of you have fitness trackers, and we know that the medical field uses them quite a lot to manage chronic diseases. Professional sports teams use trackers, and so does the field of education. And we felt that there was a place in leadership development around using self-trackers, and particularly around things that are hard to teach. Things like how to better focus your attention, how to better regulate your emotions, and how to change your thoughts. These are somewhat intangible things that can be very hard to approach from other ways. And we thought that self-tracking might be a technology that could really enhance leadership development. Specifically, in the webinar, we're going to talk about 3 main things. In the first part, I'm going to talk about self-tracking, what it is and how it relates to leadership development. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen, who's going to share with you the different ways in which we tried using self-trackers. So we did a number of different field studies, and we learned quite a bit from them. And in particular, Kathleen's going to talk about the field studies that we did that had to deal with using self-trackers to help people better manage stress, deal with fatigue, and improving vocal delivery. And these are things that individuals tell CCL that they really want to learn how to improve upon. Then in the third segment, Kathleen will pass it back to me. And I'm going to share some of our cautions and watch-outs and considerations about what we've learned. So the way I see it, we're at the dawn of a new movement in leadership development. So we can see the sun and just glimmers of it, though, on self-tracking, but the sun isn't out fully yet. So it's the beginning, it's the dawn. And so as we talk about the considerations and cautions, we'll share with you what we think you should watch out for. And then finally, we'll have time for you to ask us questions and for us to discuss them. So what is self-tracking? What is it that we're talking about? Basically, self-tracking systems quantify people's everyday experience and behaviors and offer them feedback for improvement. These tools often come in the form of a digital technology that's worn on the body, and they pair with measures and with artificial intelligence and dashboards for feedback. Essentially, self-tracking combines hardware, software, and information about what to do differently. I think that self-tracking measures really help you with self-navigation, how to navigate yourself in the world. And when you think about your car and all the things the car now has on a dashboard compared to a decade ago, the car gives you a lot more information. And I think that's what self-trackers can do for development as a leader. It can give you a whole lot more information so you can better navigate yourself through your organization and through the world. Before we go any further, I'd like to find out from you what self-tracking devices or systems you've used for personal improvement. And if you could write that in the chat box, it would be great.
Just direct it to all participants if you like so that we can all see each other's responses.
So I'm expecting to see a number of things. So Fitbit, Apple Watch, a heart rate coherence app, Fitbit, MyFitnessPal, smartphones, the Thin app, the PIP, Apple Watch, Fossil Watch, a smart weight scale that syncs with Fitbit, Biograph Infinity. This is a very good list. So there's a variety of things that people have mentioned. Oh, another person using the PIP. And so you can see that there's an abundance of these devices. And Bluetooth hearing aids, that's a really good one. And so I wasn't quite sure what people would say. So what we did was pull together some pictures of many of the products that are out there. And you can see that they take a whole variety of forms. One is the bedded, and that's something that you put on your mattress, so it's not quite a wearable, but it measures your sleep. You sleep on it. And then there's jewelry that are wearables. One example are these motive rings, and they measure things like sleep and heart rate variability. And then there's a PIP that several of you mentioned, and the PIP measures something that is basically your skin sweat on your finger. And the reason why that's important is because when you're stressed, your body sweats to cool you off. And so the PIP can sense very minute changes in your skin sweat, and so that you can get a message that, you know, you're anxious or whatever, but more importantly, it teaches you how to meditate in those situations, and it teaches you how to control your feelings so that you're less stressed. And the Muse is very similar to that. That one is a headband, and that one deals with your brain signals. And again, it's intended to teach you how to meditate. And there is Conductance, which is a heart rate variability measure, and that's when you just stick your finger into it. And it gives you your heart rate variability, which is important for stress, for your health, all kinds of things. And finally, we have up here Spire, and that's one that is truly a wearable. And that basically measures your breathing patterns, and it measures your heart rate variability, and it also can measure your sleep. So why do we think that these are so helpful and that you should use them? Well, there's a number of reasons why. Basically, all of these systems, they hold up like a mirror to your life. And they take kind of mundane things that you do, like breathe and sweat in your skin, and they hold up a mirror that shows you the pattern. And from that pattern, you can kind of deduce what is going on with you, and it gives you a lot of feedback. And then you can use that feedback if you want to make a change. If you want to act in a different way, perhaps be more attentive or to be calmer, you can use this data. They are very, very rich in feedback, and they also give you a lot of instruction. So those of you who use like the PIP or the Muse would be getting instruction on how to meditate. They're very, very helpful tools in that way. And it's related to leadership development because to lead well, you both have to be well, but you also have to be able to really understand your emotions, how you spend your attention, and your thoughts. And so these self-tracking devices get to those kinds of intangible things and help you improve upon them so that you can use that then to develop the competencies you might need for your job and to be more adaptable to change. So how do they work? Well, the way they work is there's basically an iterative cycle. And when you want to make a change, let's say you want to be focus more on your work early in the morning, you set a goal for yourself, that there's something that you want to change, and you design a way to become more focused, and then you want to measure the results, and then you want to learn from it. So there's a cycle where you design what you want to change, you get feedback, and you learn from it. And what's really great about self-tracking is that it's an iterative process. You can keep on going, and you can keep trying to get better and better at what it is. And again, it really helps with this whole idea of self-regulation, which is really understanding how and why you react the way you do. Now, I've been talking about how self-tracking can help you as an individual, but we've got lots of learning and development specialists here in the webinar, and I think some of you may be interested in using this in your organization. So some of the wonderful things about self-trackers, when you think about it at a collective level, is that you can provide leadership development to more people, not just people at the most senior levels or the mid-levels. And the learning is really personalized. So you're not all taking the same communication class. You're taking something that is highly individualized. And as I said before, personal development helps you improve as a leader. These self-tracking tools can also really be very motivational because to keep up with them, you have to be motivated, but also the data that they give you and the instruction that they give you is so personalized that it really challenges you and it gives you the opportunity to improve in whatever area you want to. And Kathleen and I would say that across a group of people, using self-trackers really can accelerate the pace of leadership development. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen, and so she's going to tell you the part of our journey that deals with testing some of these devices out. And she's going to show you how we use devices to understand if people could use them to manage stress, if they could use it to better deal with fatigue, and if they can improve their vocal delivery. Kathleen?
Thanks, Marion. Yep. So as Marion just shared with you, she's gone over a bit about the background and why we're interested in self-tracking and why we think it has the potential for the future of leadership development. And what I'm going to do now is do a bit of a deeper dive and get really specific about some of the specific topics that we think are useful for leadership development using wearables self-tracking, and also share a bit about the field tests that Marion mentioned that we've been doing as well. So the first topic I'm going to talk about today is managing stress. I probably don't have to try very hard to convince you that stress is an issue in the workplace. In fact, a recent study by the American Psychological Association found that the majority of Americans say that work is a significant source of their stress. It's also well known that stress is linked to a number of major illnesses, such as heart disease and depression. And more broadly, stress can also decrease overall performance in the workplace, making it hard to focus and hard to make decisions, which is obviously important skill sets for leaders to have. And yet, despite the fact that there's a lot of consensus that stress is bad, stress can also be notoriously hard to manage. Often stress can kind of feel like a snowball going downhill. You might not notice it at first, but by the time it really gets going, it can be very hard to stop, which is precisely why we think self-tracking offers so much promise in this area. Wearable self-tracking devices can act basically as an early warning system, notifying you of the first signs of psychological and physiological stress that might otherwise go unnoticed. And so I'm going to talk today about two different types of self-tracking that is currently on the market that could help you manage your stress. The first is measuring something called heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is basically the variation in the time interval between heartbeats, and it's considered to be a fairly accurate way of assessing activation of our automatic nervous systems. So there's some interesting new research on heart rate variability. It is a fairly new topic, but some of the emerging research shows that less variability between heartbeats is an indicator that the body is going through stress. There's also some new research showing that using these kinds of biofeedback tools is a good way to train yourself and kind of get in tune with your heart rate variability, and there's some research showing that this can lower your self-reported stress. So just to give you a little example here on the screen, you'll see that graph. The red graph is the low variability graph. So that's basically what stress looks like if you're measuring heart rate variability. And then the flip side of that, you'll see the blue graph is what it looks like when you have high heart rate variability or low measures of stress. You can also see on the screen one way that you could measure heart rate variability. In this particular product, what you do is clip one of the ends of the sensors to your earlobe, and it's connected to Bluetooth to your phone, and you'll get a readout of your heart rate variability. We've also tested, there's lots of other ways to do that. We've tested using chest straps. We've also tested, as Marion mentioned earlier, with the finger sensors where you put your finger into a little device and it measures your heart rate variability that way. So the second way that you can help figure out your stress level through using wearables is through measuring ectodermal activity, which is a measure of the continuous variations in the electrical characteristics of the skin, which is basically a very fancy way to get at measuring sweat. As Marion mentioned earlier, when you're stressed out, I probably don't have to tell you, you tend to sweat. Your sympathetic nervous system goes into fight or flight mode, which activates sweat glands and increases skin conductance, which is what these particular sensors can measure. EDA sensors have a very long history of being used in psychological research and used in biofeedback devices. And modern devices often require pressing your fingertip against the sensor, as that's a good way to measure skin conductance. And so on the screen you can see this is the PIP, which several of our participants mentioned that they tried. It's a little round white device that you can hold between your fingers and then get a readout on your phone. So for both of these, although they offer different ways to do it, they basically get at measuring your physiological responses to emotion and stress and offer early warning signs. So these tools can help you do something about your stress responses. Once you are more aware of your early signs, you can start making steps towards relaxing. This is particularly helpful in the workplace where fighting or flight, which might be your default responses, don't always go over well in meetings. So rather with practice, you can use these wearable devices to teach self-regulation strategies. So often, as Marion mentioned, the sensors are associated with smartphone apps that provide guidance on how to regulate your emotions and your stress. They could be mindfulness exercises or breathing relaxation exercises to basically calm you down before you get too worked up, and then it's very hard to calm down. At CCL, we've tried a couple of different ways of using sensors as a supplement for leadership development. Overall, I will say what we found was that leaders were very interested in learning how to monitor their stress, so there's definitely a desire there. And in general, we found that the feedback was accurate and important. We also found, though, that some of these are really used to be measuring at your state at rest. So when people are very active, sometimes there's some confusion in the wearables of whether you're stressed or you're just running around and doing things. So that is a caveat. And we actually ran a study where we looked at HRV, so the heart rate variability scores, and participants' self-reported resiliency scores, and we found that HVR was related to increasing of resilience. So the second topic I'm going to talk about today is dealing with fatigue. In today's always-on work culture of travel and 24/7 accessibility, sleep is perhaps the most important personal resource that leaders have at their disposal. There's lots and lots of research showing that lack of sleep leads to fatigue, which in turn lowers your performance through slower reaction times, impaired judgment and memory, and increasing risk of errors and accidents. But despite the fact that there's lots of research on sleep, many leaders don't get enough. Marion and I recently conducted a sleep survey and found that 42% of the leaders that we polled got less than 6 hours of sleep a night, which is a very far cry from what is recommended, which is 8 hours for most people. And critically, research shows that leaders don't often realize when their performance is being impacted by fatigue, because sleep can actually lower your self-awareness, and you need self-awareness to realize that your performance is slipping. Because of this, we believe that wearable devices can help you track your levels of fatigue and offer leaders an opportunity to overcome this otherwise fairly blind spot. So at the moment, the best way to kind of get at fatigue is to use actimetry sensors, which are the most popular and promising at the moment. They are generally worn on the wrist like a watch, and they measure different types of motor activity and can be used to calculate things like total sleep time, how long it took you to fall asleep, how many times you woke up during the night, and how active you are during the day. There are many different kinds of sensors, and they differ in their sophistication, but the overall idea is to create a picture of your personal circadian rhythm. So everybody has circadian rhythms. They are basically what your internal clock is. It regulates our sleep and awake cycle and repeats roughly every 24 hours. But as you also probably know, not everybody's circadian rhythm is the same. Some people tend to be morning people. Other people tend to be night owls. And depending on your personal circadian rhythm, you might have your peak in performance at a different point in the day. So the opportunity for development here is to use these sensors to align your circadian rhythms with your leadership challenges. For instance, if you learn through your self-tracking that you are particularly drowsy at, say, 2 p.m., you probably don't want to schedule your important stakeholder meeting during that time. Instead, you can even block your calendar and use that time where you know you can't focus to maybe take a walk or do something else and kind of come back to the work when you're more at your peak. You could even use this as kind of a team exercise. For instance, if you realize that somebody on your team is a night owl and nobody else is, you might want to strategize how you can divide up the work to kind of leverage everybody when they're at their peak. Which, when we talk about this, sometimes people think that that's a strange idea. It does seem not usually what you think about when you think about performance in the workplace, taking naps or strategizing along your circadian rhythms. But this is actually being tested in some pretty cool populations. So right now, the military and professional athletes, as well as clinical populations and medical doctors, are currently testing out this idea of wearing these kinds of wearables in order to make their team perform at their best. So basically what you would do is have people sit out if they're too fatigued to make important decisions, or you'd be sure to not put those people in dangerous situations, but rather kind of check who is ready to perform at their best when you're making these decisions. And then the third topic that we have is about improving vocal delivery. So as a leader, I'm sure you all know that being able to get your point across is a pretty important deal. You need to be able to persuade high-level stakeholders, rally underperforming troops, and yet anxiety around public speaking is very, very common. Roughly 15 to 30% of adults say that they would rather not speak in public. And strong vocal delivery has been linked to positive leadership characteristics. Because of this, there's a long tradition of leaders getting vocal or public speaking lessons to try to improve their public speaking ability, but of course not everybody is comfortable with that or can afford that, and so this was something that not everybody had access to until now, and self-tracking offers this as an option. So the technology for this is voice analytics. Voice analytics offers an opportunity to get basically digital voice coaching. It should be noted that this one is a little different than the other two I've talked about. The last two were both wearables, where you wore them on your body. Voice analytics is a little bit different. What voice analytics is basically a digital program that might be associated with an app that's often available on your phone or on a computer, and it relies on AI and machine learning to identify the speaker's emotions and intent by analyzing vocal patterns. This could include things like pitch variability, pausing, pace, volume, and all of these features are then converted into outcome data that can be used to understand how people are interpreting your voice. So if you look at the screen right now, this is an example of Voice Vibes, which is a company that does some voice analytics, and this is the kind of dashboard that you might receive. So it gives you an overall score of how well you're doing and really breaks down all the different aspects of your voice. These tools offer a lot of important opportunities for leaders because both research and practice has shown that training can help leaders gain conscious control over their voices. Voice analytic technologies often come with some detailed feedback dashboards, like I was just showing you, and can give you some insights into which features of speech can be developed. Many also offer written advice and tips for improving your vocal delivery, and the repeated use of such tools allow for practice and implementation of improved techniques. And so Marion and I have actually been conducting a study on this very topic about using voice analytics and to analyze vocal delivery and trying to figure out how that can impact our perceptions of leaders. And I'm very excited that we have, I was going to say hot off the press, but they're not even off the press yet. They're hot going into the press. Results of a study that we did where we used a voice analytics tool to record leaders within a leadership development simulation. And in this simulation, people were campaigning for a leadership role, and we used the voice analytics to analyze what came across as their voice. And what's really interesting is we found that the program could actually predict who won these situations. It was a voting situation where other people had to vote who should be the leader for that simulation project, and the AI technology could predict it, which I think offers a lot of potential for the future of leadership development, because if we know certain qualities of your voice will make you be seen more as a leader, we can then coach that. So now that you know a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing, I'm curious. So we've got a poll that's coming up, and you have 3 different options, and I'm interested in learning which of these self-tracking systems would be most helpful for your own leadership development out of the 3 options that are on there. So hopefully you can see a poll, and you can, if you just click one of the options, we're going to find out the results in just a minute here.
Just click your option, and then there's a submit button in the lower right corner. And we'll share that data.
All right, looks like the results are interesting. So a pretty broad spread. It looks like managing stress is the one that people found to be the most helpful. I would say I think that that's probably pretty consistent with what we found when we did some of our testing. People really are motivated to manage stress. And then it looks like vocal delivery came in second there with 39%. And then dealing with fatigue, it came in third as 17% of people. So a pretty good spread. That's reassuring to me. It sounds like all 3 of these are useful to folks on the phone. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Marion, and she's going to share some cautions and considerations for those of you who are ready to try some of this stuff out.
So after working on these different field studies and testing them out with ourselves and our colleagues and with CCL participants, we came to the conclusion that we really are at the dawn of a new age, that things are looking good, that they're very exciting, but that as an area there were many things to watch out for. And so I'm going to share with you some of the things we learned in our testing. Not surprisingly, price comes up. We found out that there was a very steep quality-cost trade-off. Now, that may be changing over time, but when we tested out these devices, you got what you paid for. And we learned to be a little bit cautious about some of the lower-cost devices because their data wasn't as accurate as we wanted. And if I'm going to use data to make a change in my life, I want it to be accurate. And if I'm going to tell people in my organization to use data to make a change in their life, I want it to be accurate too. So our advice at this point in time is to use devices that have medical-grade quality sensors in it. And if you're going to use them in an organization, before you buy a bunch of them, you need to test 1 or 2 before you roll it out and see how they really work, if they live up to the advertising, because there is a lot of snake oil. And if you're going to use them with people in leadership roles, they have to have a very strong connection to leadership tasks and goals. We had, most people were very excited to use the trackers, and they could make that connection between what data was provided and what they wanted to work on. But sometimes some people couldn't. Some people had trouble with some of the stress measuring devices and they couldn't quite see the connection. And with some of the other sensors, some of the feedback was things like duration in which you used it. And people said, well, I know how long I used it. I don't need it to tell me that. So you've got to use devices where the face value about how relevant it is really high. And you want feedback that is highly understandable. And it has to be both clear and nuanced. So feedback that's too complicated, people don't use. They don't know what it means. Feedback that's too simple doesn't help people make changes. So you've got to find the right balance there. And ease of use is very important. Obviously, many of these devices are not intended for leadership development purposes. They're intended for other populations. where maybe there's different norms about comfort or different norms about how often you recharge a battery or how easy it is to use. So you've got to test them out with people who are the population that you're going to use them with to see if they will accept all of the kind of constraints that come with them and setting them up. And important to all of us is the idea that these sensors need to be scientifically sound. Most of them, as we said before, they're not validated for leadership populations, so you have to see if they work in a leadership population. For example, one of the things that we tested, it was a wristband, and it measured your skin sweat, and it was developed for a clinical population. And so Kathleen tried it out, and when she brushed her teeth and when she whisked an egg, it gave her an alert that she was at risk for a seizure. So that is not something that you want to use in a leadership setting. You really want to make sure that it's validated for the kind of people that you're going to use it with. And finally, there's a whole host of ethical issues that this brings up. And the law is lagging, it's not ahead of us, and there's also no agency that regulates these. So some of the questions you have to consider are who owns the raw data and who sees the results? And what are the privacy issues with this? If you're using it in an organization, you want to safeguard people's privacy, and my recommendation would be that only they get to see their data, that the organization does not. But it's a question, and if you're using it personally, you really need to read the terms of use and to understand the privacy issues as to what data of yours will be, you know, up there in the cloud. And in sum, we feel that we're really at the beginning at a new point in the field of leadership development, that we have a new tool to put in the toolkit. And that it's a very exciting time. I think self-tracking is going to take off, but we are just at the beginning, and there are things that you have to watch out for. So now, Kathleen and I would like to turn this over to you and give you an opportunity to ask questions. You can write them in the chat box, and we'll address them.
All right, the first question we have, do you have studies of any organizations that have used it or are beginning to use it?
That's a very good question. A lot of professional sports teams use these, and a lot of hospitals use these. We have not conducted research in any particular organization that was using them, but there are a number of places out there that are. They're often used in high-risk kinds of organizations, like people who work with heavy machinery and things where if you don't sleep well, there can be a very serious consequence. And there are a number of organizations who use the voice analytics software to improve the way people speak when they work in call centers or when they make sales calls. So there are a number of different organizations that are out there.
Gray, he's asking, are there any companies that are integrating the different sensing technologies for a complete offering?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a definitive answer. My answer to that would be to keep looking at this. As of today, July 16th, I don't know of any, but, you know, in a week or two, there could be. There are lots of Kickstarter campaigns and things like that that are trying to pull all these different things together.
Yeah, and I will add to that probably that I'm sure there's some that, you know, are just getting off the ground, but for right now, I think the one that I know of that is doing the most kind of integrated, complete offering is probably the military. They've really been looking at a wide variety of ways to use wearables, everything from something on your wrist to wearing an entire vest that measures your heart rate and all kinds of things. So I think that they're a space where they're testing out a lot.
Thank you. A question from Kara. Have you ever heard of organizations using a dashboard function for wearables so that a leader of a functional unit could help his or her direct reports track their scores, results, in a supportive way to help his or her team manage stress? I know Elite HRV has a team dashboard function for courses.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and this is something that we're seeing more and more happening when it comes to the different kinds of self-tracking methods and devices. A number of the ones that we looked at do offer that team-level dashboard, and so a number of different sleep sensors do offer that overall look so that the leader of a team can see, again, mostly kind of more in military or professional athletes, that can kind of see how the different members of their team is doing that day when it comes to stress. And the voice analytics program that we used also offered a team dashboard, so you can kind of get one kind of bird's eye view of what's going on with your team.
Question from Madonna. Why use self-tracking device in a company or organization since the information obtained is health-related, which is confidential?
Well, that gets into the whole ethical issue and into the privacy issues. And so it's a very controversial topic. So it depends who owns the data. If the individual owns the data and the company cannot see it, that's one thing. Sometimes companies give out health trackers so people improve their health so that there's a reduction of cost for insurance. But it's a very controversial thing, and you really have to pay attention to what the privacy issues are.
The other thing I'll add to that as well is, I think the benefit isn't necessarily in seeing your direct report data, but it's in helping your direct report. So if you think about other leadership development tools like 360-degree feedback, assessments, those are also confidential. Your organization doesn't get access to all of your data for 360s, but the point is that the 360 helps leaders develop, and so we're looking at this in a similar way.
Doug is asking, what about Hawthorne effects? Or is this actually good because it imparts more self-awareness?
So that's a very interesting question, and a Hawthorne effect is kind of like the placebo effect to some extent. It's just because you're in a study, are you getting better results? And that's kind of hard to discern because I can't think of a placebo tracker you could give people and then give them fake data. But I think that they are actually good because they do give you very rich self-awareness. So they take all your habits and the things that you do and things that you don't really question, mundane things. And then when you look at the dashboard, it comes back in a way that you can see a pattern. So I think that that is a helpful kind of thing.
Peter's asking, has the research so far been focused on individuals or small teams, or has this been used yet to look at larger groups to identify development needs for segments or geographic locations of an organization?
Well, to my knowledge, the only large groups that has been used for are the sleep trackers, used for large teams or used in organizations, as I mentioned before, where there are physical hazards. And so there they do try and look across and make sure that as a group that there are if there's development issues regarding mistakes and accidents, they try and use it that way to help highlight that people need to pay attention to their sleep.
Doug's asking, what do we learn about high potentials who reject such interventions?
That's a very interesting question. One of the things that we've learned, and Marion mentioned this, that this is only as helpful as an individual finds it to be. If an individual chooses to not use it as an intervention or to take it seriously, there's little that can be done. I would say that goes for most leadership development processes, though. If people don't want to learn from them, they're not going to. It's an interesting question. I don't know that I would say we can learn one specific thing from people who don't want to do this. I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons that this just isn't your cup of tea. But there's also probably a lot of people who would pay attention to this and maybe wouldn't pay attention to other kinds of leadership development. So I think it's all about finding the right fit for the people.
And I would add that it gets back to that age-old question of how committed are you to doing something. And if you're not committed, it doesn't matter what the intervention is. It probably isn't going to help you.
Another question, how interested are leaders in trying wearables out?
Well, we found that they're very excited and that there's a big novelty effect. And so people do want to do it and they do want to try it and they're open to it. However, if you hit a glitch, like it doesn't sync or the battery dies out quickly or the band or the sensor somehow doesn't work, then people lose interest quickly. What would you say, Kathleen?
I would say I think that there's a lot of excitement whenever we've done some of our pilot testing in the classroom or with companies or individuals are always very excited. There's kind of a cool factor to it. So, yeah, but I would say that it depends so much on the individual and also on the wearable, right? So whether it's a wearable that makes sense for what the individual is interested in doing.
Anything else to add on why people might give up on wearables? It's maybe not working and those things. Are there other aspects?
Well, again, if you're not committed, you know, there is the human factor. If you're not motivated to do it, you're not motivated to do it.
And my sleep tracker says I need more deep sleep. Should I even trust it?
And I would say it depends on your sleep tracker. So if your sleep tracker is not of a medical quality, I probably wouldn't trust it all that readily. I used very high-quality sleep tracker as part of a beta test that we had here at the Center for Creative Leadership. And the sleep trackers have been validated on young athletic men. I am not a young athletic man, you can't see me, but trust me. And for me and other women of a certain age, the sleep tracker didn't work that well. It confused watching TV with sleep. So I would really check out the principles and the science on which your tracker is based before you trust it.
Yeah, so on the sleep tracker topic, that is one, I didn't mention this earlier, but that is one that we did look at for some of our field tests, and we ended up not going through a larger field test like we did with the other two topics because it turns out that those were all used for military and football players, and they're very different lifestyles than we do in the office. And so figuring out, it just wasn't calibrated for peak performance for us. So I think that there's some work to be done, but I think it's an exciting space. I think that the technology can definitely be developed to calibrate to the office place, which isn't something that we have a lot of yet. And I would say that from the early testing that we did with the sleep sensors, people did gain some insight, even though, as Marion said, sometimes it confused watching TV with sleeping. We had one person who actually didn't realize that they had a medical sleeping issue, and so after getting their feedback, spoke to a doctor and got diagnosed. And so while I will say it's not the be-all, end-all, it might be an important first step to get more information from a different source.
Greg asks, are you aware of any coaching guides that discuss how to use the data as a coach?
There aren't any generic coaching guides, but I would say the same coaching principles that you use for talking about other kinds of assessments would be valuable here. You know, asking people, first of all, understanding the data yourself if you're the coach that they've agreed to show you, and knowing what it's based on, and then asking people what they think it means and help them work through it, help them set goals, and help them understand what they want to do with that data. So I think it would be very much the same as with typical assessments that we use in coaching.
And one of the things that we've done here at PCL when we were looking at some of these is to just give some of the wearables to some of our coaches that we work with at PCL and have them try it out so that they can kind of make those connections.
Erica's asking, has anyone looked at the pitfalls of future leaders using this as a crutch? For instance, if someone knows they don't focus well from 1 to 3 p.m., they avoid doing tasks that need doing because their device says so.
That's an interesting question. I think, you know, if with anything, it can be both used and abused. So I'm sure that somebody will figure out how to abuse it. But I also think that, you know, if you avoid doing, it's all about using it smart, right? If you avoid doing important tasks while you can't focus well, that's a good call, but it also means you have to figure out when you should be doing those important tasks, not just never doing them.
Thank you. Peter asked, have you seen potential to drive labor policy changes? I work in healthcare department or development, and physician residencies are well known for 36-hour shifts for new doctors.
I don't know if it's driven changes, but there has been research that has shown that nurses who don't sleep well are more likely to stick themselves with a needle, that there's more accidents and things like that. So there is data out there. So I suspect it could be used in a medical setting, and then they could, in the organization, you could see how it correlates with outcomes that matter to you.
Yeah, and I will say, while I don't know of any policies that have been changed so far, I think that there is definitely the potential there. And I actually do know of a study, a colleague who is collecting data in a hospital for that, literally that reason, to try to have some evidence to prove that we need to change those long shifts for doctors.
Kara's asked, could you provide the name of a higher quality sleep tracker you would recommend? Are Motive or Aura rings actually valid in your professional opinion?
Well, at this point in time, we're reluctant to make any specific recommendations because these products are changing all the time. And anything that I might recommend today, it might be different next week. So my advice would be to really read the website and to see what the reviews are, and to look in the website and ask that question, look for the scientific information. Is it based on any studies? And if they're not based on published studies or even in-house studies, then I would not use them for sleep. Particularly for something, you know, like sleep, which is such a physiological variable, you really want to make sure that the product comes out of a lab that has done its homework.
And then I would say doing some of your own beta testing as well. For all of the sensors that we looked at, we first bought 1 or 2 and kind of tested it out ourselves to make sure that there was some kind of base validity before moving forward with anything bigger.
Great. Thank you, ladies. It looks like we've reached the end of our time for the webinar. Thank you, Marion and Kathleen, for exploring wearables and self-tracking technologies for leader development. Our participants tomorrow will receive a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording, as well as a new wearables white paper we'll want to share. We hope our attendees have enjoyed the session today and will join us for a future webinar. As you exit the webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete the evaluation so we can make these events well worth your time. Anyone who completes the evaluation will be entered into a drawing for a copy of the Direction Alignment Commitment Guidebook. You can also request that a CCL team member follow up with you. Again, thank you for joining us.
This concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.